everyone, my name is Joy Maleti and welcome to Money Matters. Money Matters is an interactive show that aims to educate viewers on consumer rights and provide advice concerning money. Do you have a money-related problem that you would like advice on? Well, contact us and we may be able to get you some expert advice. Today, we are looking at the economic changes brought about by COVID-19. Why is this relevant, you may ask? Well, in April 2020, the International Labour Organization predicted global job losses of about 305 million and an estimated 1.6 billion jobs at risk for the most vulnerable in the labour market. In South Africa alone, over 100 million jobs were lost over the course of 2020. One of the many questions people have is how to deal with the changes brought about by the pandemic. Please do share your views with us on Facebook and Twitter at the SID Media using the hashtag #MMOnSID. Today, we are joined by Thapelo Moloi, who is an economist and financial advisor. Thapelo believes that there are better ways of navigating the economic changes brought about by COVID-19. Hello, Thapelo, and welcome to Money Matters. It is a pleasure to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you so much, Joy, and thank you so much for the invitation and to the entire team as well. Appreciate it.
Well, before we get into the main body of our discussion, I think it is important to paint a picture for our viewers of where the South African economy was pre-COVID-19, where it is currently, and how much of an impact the pandemic has had and the resultant lockdown has had on the economy to date.
All right.
And I think my first question would be, what was the state of the SA economy pre-COVID-19?
All right. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's a very important question. Now, if one looks at the data for 5 years before leading up to the advent of COVID-19, I think everyone could agree that the economy wasn't doing very well from that end. I mean, we were growing at less than 2%, right, per annum. And if you look at 2019, we only had about a growth of 0.2%, which was really bad. And the years before that, like I'm saying, it was averaging less than 2%. Now, this is an economy that needs about 5 to 10% growth per annum in order to create jobs. So already when COVID came, the economy wasn't doing very well. Now, at a quarterly basis, if you look at some of the data, you find that some of the sectors in the economy were already shedding jobs and were already contracting, things like mining and construction, which were contracting at around 10% per annum already. And then mining, like I'm saying, manufacturing at about 11%. Now, if you flip it a little bit and look at unemployment, we were at about 26% year on year in terms of unemployment rate in South Africa, which is amongst the highest in the world and definitely the highest in Africa. So already the economy was not doing very well, whichever way you look at it.
Sheesh, those are quite concerning figures, right?
Definitely.
And I think given the impact that the pandemic has had on our economy, how have our people been impacted by all of this?
Okay, I think we need to look at it in different ways. But the first one was looking at it from an unemployment point of view. If you look at the data for Q2 2020, just after the lockdown, the first lockdown, we lost about 2.2 million jobs in South Africa, leading to around 4.2 million people at that time who lost their jobs. Again, in Q1 this year, 2021, unemployment increased to 32.6%, which means 7 million people in South Africa that are able to work are not working and there are no jobs already. If you look at the Unemployment Insurance Fund that is administered by the government, leading up to this year, they've already paid 51 billion rands in unemployment applications already. The second way you can look at it is looking at businesses, especially the ones in the informal sector. You'd realize that if your business was not regarded as essential services, and this is where you find mostly the informal sector, most of them were really hit because they couldn't operate, and as such, things were really bad. So that's how bad COVID has been in terms of where we are as a people.
These are startling figures, and I think it's nothing to take lightly. And I mean, if we are to say that 18% of the population is is jobless, essentially people that are able to work. Those
Yeah.
are quite significant figures. I mean, how big is the population of South Africa? We're talking about how big? It's about 6 billion people. And 18% is quite a significant number.
Quite a big number, definitely.
And I think most of those numbers are really centered around young people, which is quite sad. So I think, yeah, sure, this it's been quite a stretch, right, with the pandemic and the impact that this has had.
Definitely.
On particularly, I mean, we did say the most vulnerable in our population, and looking at the poverty lines, this, While you, our viewers at home, mull over these staggering figures, let us go for a quick ad break. Please continue sharing your views and comments on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag #MM_on_SID. That is hashtag #MM_on_SID on both Twitter and Facebook. We'll be back shortly.
All of these and more on SID Media TV.
Welcome back. This is Money Matters. And today we are tackling the economic changes brought about by COVID-19. South Africa was already facing a social and economic crisis pre-COVID-19. We were right in the middle of a recession, rather. The pandemic merely exacerbated the situation, leaving millions of people unemployed and even hopeless about the future. However, we are here to empower you with better ways of managing your finances, or better yet, to assist you with ideas of how to generate an income. Before the break, our guest, Thapelo Moloi, an economist and financial advisor, shared with us how the state of our economy was before COVID-19 and some of the challenges that COVID-19 has had on the economy and our people. And because you at home are also part of this discussion, please share your views and comments with us on hashtag #MM_on_SID on both Twitter and Facebook. Make sure you also tag us using the details on your screen right now. Thapelo, I think my follow-up question would be then, why is it so important for people to be money savvy? Or maybe others could put it as financially literate. What is the importance of that?
Okay, so thank you so much for that, Joy. Like I said, I think if you look at the payouts already, like I said, from the Unemployment Insurance Fund, we're seeing around 51 billion rands, which is unprecedented, of course. They'd never before had to deal with so many applications for unemployment. And this shows you that there's quite a lot of people that lost their jobs. But now I think the scariest thing is that on average, South Africans spend around 75% of their earnings servicing debt. Oh. Right? So in other words, for every R1 we make, most of us pay 75 cents to service debt, right? So that leaves very little space for savings, right? We have to borrow at times just to make sure that we get by. As they say, there's more month than money, than the money that is available,
the money runs
right?
out before
So this then takes us to your question, why is it important to be money savvy? I think we live in unprecedented times, as we see it right now. And the truth is that anything can happen at any point in time. In other words, the fact that you're employed is not enough security, right? And the fact that you have a business doesn't mean that it will always be making money. So we live in very unprecedented times. So therefore, we need to be prepared and plan better, right? For ourselves, for our children, and everyone else that would be affected. I was reminded of a verse as I was thinking about this, Proverbs 13 verse 22, which says that a wise man leaves an inheritance not only for his children, but for his children's children, right? And it has made me ask myself so many questions to say, where am I? Where are we as South Africans when it comes to that? So it's important that we be money savvy because we live in unprecedented times and anything can happen, as we've seen in the current state.
Yeah. And I think then this, say, if we knew, right, say 5 years ago, that 2020 would be a pandemic year, with all the lockdown restrictions and the resultant job losses that you've alluded to, do you think that we would have been better prepared for this?
If we knew, right? I think that's a very good question. If we knew, I think a lot of us would have loved to know. But I think if you know when you're going to die, you perhaps would prepare better,
plan better, right?
But because we don't know when we would die, it's often difficult to plan, right? But I think planning has nothing to do with whether you know or you don't know, right? We all have to prepare better for now. And also prepare better for the future that we are going to experience. So I think if people knew, right, we would have been better prepared. But I think it doesn't take away the fact that irregardless of that, you have to plan better.
I'm still quite skeptical though, because I mean, you've mentioned that about 75% of our income goes towards servicing debt.
Yeah.
So already we are not in a very good position.
I actually think that it's actually a question of, what do you prioritize?
Yeah.
Right? We get into debt because we prioritize things we shouldn't be prioritizing, right? I was actually looking at, how young people, the moment they get a job, the first thing they think about is a car.
I know,
right? 3 months later, they're buying a car. And no one is thinking investments, and especially within our community, right? And I think that's a mindset that we need to change, right? The first thing that you should be able to think about the moment you get a job is, how do I save? How do I invest? As opposed to, how do I get into a debt, right? And the other thing is that, because we don't often balance our priorities, right? We run for things that, like I said, we shouldn't be running for. And at times, they're even more expensive than what we can afford.
That's true.
If you look at, our expenditure, if you're spending more than 50% on a car of your income, that already sets you back quite a lot. So therefore, it's about prioritizing. How do we prioritize better? Yeah.
Well, this leads me to my next question then. How important is it for people to budget? And can you really say that I'm not making enough to budget? Is there even a minimum amount for budgeting?
Yeah, I think the principles of budgeting have nothing to do with how much you earn. I think it was Dave Ramsey who said, personal finance is 80% behavior and 20% about how much you earn. In other words, it's about what behaviors do you put in place, right? That will end up either making sure that your personal finances are better managed or it becomes disastrous. So it has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with behavior. How is your behavior when it comes to money? Now, to your question, why is it important to have a budget? And maybe what is a budget itself?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing about a budget is that it sets the tone for your overall personal finances. That's number one. In other words, it gives direction. So that you prioritize the things that are important. It's so sad. I was actually making an example at one of my presentations that it's so sad that some of us have never even touched our money. The moment it gets into our account, it's out again. You've never had the opportunity to just withdraw it and hold it in your hand. I always say, sometimes what you must do is just withdraw it and just deposit it back, just to get the feel.
What about the bank charges?
I know, right? But just to get the feel. Now, some of us have never actually held our money, right? And just get that feeling. What is it like to have my money, right? So a budget sort of sets the tone for your personal finances. And I think the most important thing about a budget, remember what you're doing there, you're putting what your expenses are, what your income is, minus what is it that you need to spend on. I think what it does, it aids you to actually be faithful to God, because that's the first thing you do in your expenses. You look at, how do I pay God? But if you don't do a budget, often at times, God comes as the last resort. And by that time, there's actually no money. Right? So it helps us with becoming faithful. And of course, it helps us to control our spending. And I think the most important one is it helps you to actually reach your goals. right? Whatever financial goals, whether it's to increase your investments or whether it's to reduce your debt or whatever, if you've got a plan, then it becomes easier to tackle all of those stuff. But because we don't budget, we never know what our goals are, and we don't even have a direction towards what are we working towards.
Yeah. I actually want you to reiterate on the point that you made around the practicalities of budgeting, that it's actually, you said it's your income. So you take your income, you minus your expenses from your income, and you see what's disposable from that. And you touched on a very important point, right, which is the tithing. So does my tithing come in? So when I get my income, is my tithing part of the income, or do I say, this is what has come in minus the tithe, then this is my income? How do you deal with that?
Sure, that's a good question. I think for me, I mean, some people say tithe is an expense, right? And I think that's a matter of faith. Where do you stand for? For some people, it's an expense. For some people, it's more like a donation. I'm donating to God, or whatever the case might be. So I think it depends how you look at it. Like I'm saying, with some people, it's an expense. I need to pay my tithe. I need to remit my tithe every month to God and all that. Okay. So I've seen budgets where it's actually an expense.
Okay. Yeah. So you treat it as an expense. So that's what you say. You say income, you reduce the tithe, and then you reduce your all other expenses.
Yes.
And then that's
yeah,
how you
I think it's just a matter of, priority, what goes out first, right? So you should make sure that God's tithe goes out first before you can start tackling all the other debts.
You might have touched on some of these quite key elements, right? But I really want us to, for our viewers, for the sake of our viewers, just reiterate on what an emergency fund really is. So when we talk emergency funds, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So the emergency fund, as the name says, it's an emergency fund, right? And it's basically money that you actually set aside for emergencies that happen unexpected, right? And to the question around the budget, in fact, it should become part of your budget, where you actually save a certain amount on the side for emergencies, right? So it's an emergency fund to cover, those lives unexpected costs and stuff like that. Now, one of the biggest things about an emergency fund, it actually helps you to avoid debt, right? Say you've got something that comes up from a family member that needs assistance, you did not plan for that. We did not budget for that, and all of a sudden there's an emergency, right? So instead of going out and taking a debt in order to help out at a family member, which of course then becomes a question of, it's family, right? And often at times you get into debt because it's family, which I always tell my clients that it's about the principles more than it is about family. I know it's very hard to say this, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
By having an emergency fund, you avoid actually getting into unnecessary debt just to cover those expenses that are unexpected. The second thing that is really great about having an emergency fund is that it actually gives you peace of mind when life throws a curveball. Because life does throw a curveball many of the times. So having an emergency fund actually helps you to then tap into that. There's something called, petty cash in businesses, right? So that's where they tap into for any type of emergencies or those small expenses that they did not budget for. So having an emergency fund is almost the same as that. It gives you peace of mind. The other thing that you can do if you're really clever around your emergency fund, because if you're putting it under your bed, it's not going to earn anything for you in terms of interest. But there's really some good products out there that gives you 32 days interest and all those. So you could really put some of the money into that, right, as part of your emergency fund. And you can call that money anytime. Of course, they'll charge you interest if you want to call it a little bit earlier than 32 days. But the point is, by having an emergency fund and then putting it away in an interest-bearing product, you can still make more money and be able to cover all those lives unexpected expenses.
And I think we do have quite a number of products, right, in the market. I mean, you do have money market accounts as well to use, for some of those monies where you can literally call on that money when you need to call on it. That's quite interesting. So and insurance doesn't fall under that, right?
No, it doesn't. That expense.
It doesn't fall under that. So would you say that it is advisable then, given where we are right now, for people to actually cash out on their retirement savings, like the pensions and stuff like that? Would it be advisable?
I think we've actually seen a wave of those the last few months.
Yeah.
Without really picking up on the teachers, but I think we've seen a lot of teachers cashing out for whatever the reasons on their pension fund. Now, I think we need to understand that a pension fund is exactly that, for pension.
Yeah.
Just like the emergency fund is for emergencies, a pension fund is for your pension. It's meant to help you with running your lifestyle. In other words, maintain the same lifestyle even when you retire, or when you get to a point where you can't work. So it's an emergency fund. Now, if you're going to cash out, I think there's three important things that one needs to take into consideration before you decide whether to cash out. The first one is don't drop off your retired self. So in other words, if you cash out now, when you get to retirement, how are you going to maintain your lifestyle? So the first thing is don't rob yourself. Your retired self, when you get to retirement, you still want to have money and not depend on the government pension fund. The second thing is, because it's a pension fund, you need to consider that there are tax implications if you're going to cash it out before your retirement, right? There's certain categories that they usually put out, but if you're going to cash it out before retirement, the tax is very high.
Penalties.
So think about that
You get hit.
before you cash it out. And I think the last one is there's obviously a loss of interest in terms of compound interest that you could have earned if you left your money till retirement.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other one that they call it the eighth wonder, compound interest, right? So there's a loss of compound interest. So you need to think about those type of things before you actually decide whether you want to cash out your pension fund.
Yeah, we need to revisit the concept of compounding
Yes.
interest. That's great. But thank you so much for those insights. We are going for another quick ad break. Stay tuned and keep sharing your views and comments with us on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag #MMOnSID. We'll be back. Welcome back. This is Money Matters, and we are still tackling the economic changes brought about by COVID-19. Now, before the break, there were quite a number of important nuggets that Thapelo, you touched on, and I really want us to revisit some of the questions on the earlier segment. And I think there's quite a buzz around uninsurance, the unemployment insurance fund. What exactly is the unemployment insurance fund, and who has access to it?
Okay, so firstly, everyone that works is taxed with unemployment. So if you look at your pay slip, there's a figure there, which is the unemployment insurance fund, and it's compulsory. In other words, you can't opt out.
Okay.
Right? So every employer pays it. And every employee pays it.
Okay.
And this is insurance that is meant to give you some sort of short-term relief in instances where you either become unemployed or you are unable to work because maybe you had an accident or whatever the case might be, and even sometimes because of illness or sometimes because of maternity, right? If you need to go to maternity or you need to get some sort of leave. So it's short-term relief for those occurrences.
Okay. Do you get the full portion of your salary?
Obviously not.
Okay.
It's meant to offer short-term relief, right? So it's obviously not the full.
It's not the full term. Okay. So who has access to it? You said, would that be the employees contributing towards it, or does anyone else have access to it?
No, it's only for employees you contribute towards it.
Okay, so it's only for the people that actually make the contributions towards the fund.
Yes.
Okay. So and why is it? I think the last really important question that I really want to sort of end this particular segment is the importance of giving, or rather, why is it important for those who have to give to those who do not have? And particularly, I mean, given, the times that we're living in now.
I think that's a very important question, and thank you for that. I think I'm going to quote Counsels on Stewardship, page 15, which says, "Now God has called us to be stewards, entrusting us with means," and Ellen White says, "not to be hoarded," right? The means that God has given us, they are not meant for us for us to hoard them, but to be used in benefiting others, right? So whatever God has blessed us with, it's very important that we become a blessing, or in other words, we become the channels through which we become a blessing to other people. So I think that's very important.
That's quite true. And I think it's been quite a pleasure having this conversation with you, Thapelo.
Thank you.
And for our viewers at home, I think we've received quite a number of valuable nuggets from this discussion. And I mean, Thapelo has been sharing, some great advice on how to better deal with some of the challenges that have been brought about by COVID-19. And now to sort of close this off, I'd like Thapelo to share with us some of his closing remarks. What are your parting
So I would
shots?
definitely go back to the point that managing money has nothing to do with how much you earn, but everything to do with your behavior around how much you earn.
Did you hear that? Managing money does not have to do with how much you earn. And what was the last bit?
It has to do with your behavior with the one that you have.
It has to do, so it's a behavior thing. So
Yes.
managing your money does not have to do with how much you earn, but it is the behavior
Yeah.
of, I just want to coach you there, of what you have.
Yes.
It's about the behavior of what you have. Thank you so much, Thapelo, for joining us for this very important and insightful discussion around some of the challenges that were brought about by the, some of the economic challenges that were brought about by COVID. And you've shared quite a number of powerful nuggets. And I think our viewers at home do appreciate the advice that you've shared with us today. We look forward to continuing this discussion with you at home on our Facebook and Twitter platforms. Please use the hashtags as they appear right now on your screen. See you online shortly, but for those who are not able to log on, please do join us again right here next week on Money Matters, same time, same place, for more insights and conversations about money. From me, Joy Maleti, and the rest of the Money Matters team, it's goodbye and God bless.